What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the great man from Cage Warriors, play-by-play, media, promotion, every little thing that you could do, the man of many wonders, Brad Wharton, as we look ahead to Cage Warriors 189, which goes down May 31st over in beautiful Roma in Italy. Brad, how are things? Are you good?
Things are good. That was a wonderful introduction. I don't think anyone said anything that nice. Oh, so many nice things about me in such a short space of time as that before. So always happy to be here, man.
Probably as many bad things in a short time as I know myself. Come here to me. We're basically at the halfway point of the year now, although we're not. There's another month. But anyway, what would you say the year has been like for Cage Warriors so far? There's been a lot of big fights. I think I was having an argument with someone there on Twitter, as you tend to do, a couple of weeks ago, and I was kind of making the case that the current crop of up-and-coming Cage Warriors prospects are probably as good as it's ever been. You know, we've obviously had great fighters come out of Cage Warriors, but I don't know if there's ever been as many top prospects. Not to say they'll all make it or anything like that, but what has the year been like for you, you know, bringing all those lads on, commentating on them, being at all of those fights as well? Would you agree with me that the current crop is as good as that? What way do you analyse that?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you, Sean, to be honest. You know, it's always getting better, right? You know, from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago, the levels that we're seeing come through the sport are always getting better. You know, we're in a great position now whereby, you know, if you look, for example, a lot of the young Irish lads, to use an example, who debuted on that Dublin card, you know, they might have only been debut pros or one or two fights in, but they've all had long amateur careers, and, you know, they're training with coaches who have been fighting and coaching for 20 odd years. So, you know, the foundations in the sport itself are better, and that's going to breed better athletes. And I think that's what we're seeing. You know, when you're looking at the guys with just one or two fights under the belts, and you're looking at guys like Shea Ingram, for example, you know, he's going to be fighting over this summer series. You know, he's got the confidence and swagger and the ability of a guy who you know, previously you'd be looking at maybe like a 10-fight professional. So it's always great to see, and, you know, just being able to be a part of that on Cage Warriors is a great privilege. We seem to have so many of these guys coming through. You know, your likes of Joe Fields. You know, I could sit here and reel up names all day, and we're going to see a bunch more on this Italian card coming up too. And I think it's, you know, the early part of the year, it's always like, you know, sort of getting your house in order kind of thing. You're bringing those new guys up, and, you know, you're getting guys who haven't, you know, maybe 4 or 5 months out for the first time. And then the summer and autumn is where you see like the big fights come together. And I think we're working towards some really big fights at the moment on Cage Warriors. So very much looking forward to start this summer series off. Yeah,
it's interesting. Like I was actually talking to Graham on the Severe MMA podcast the other day, and like we sometimes tend to forget like that this path. Or not even just the pathway, but like for younger fighters to see the road that has been taken. Road is just another name for path, but anyway, the road that's been taken by the fighters that came before them is a mass thing. Like you know, we've seen with Ireland very evidently, but you know, you mentioned Shea Ingram there. I know how, like, he's been training with Oban Elliott and different things, and they kind of have a bond now. Like, he's looking at Oban and thinking, I could probably do the same thing as him. Or I spoke to Oban the other day, and, you know, he's training with Ian Gary. He's like, well, I mean, you know, maybe in a few fights I'm going to go the road that Ian Gary went, and so on. And that's very, very, that's very new to the sport as well, because like we were even talking about, say, Owen Roddy, a guy, you know, who fought he did fight in Cage Warriors, didn't he? He fought in loads of different places. Was the Wilson Hayes fight in Cage Warriors? It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Cage Warriors. Yeah, so that was in Scotland in 2012.
Yeah, so like he's a guy that, like, there was no proven path for him, and he wasn't able to get there, even though he was fighting fucking Wilson Hayes and really, really good guys in Cage Warriors in other places as well. Whereas now, obviously, the guys that came after, like if he was in around these days in Cage Warriors, or Chris Fields was another guy you kind of you mentioned without mentioning his name there a second ago, another guy who would definitely be on the road to the UFC if they were around today. So for like the young guys, they don't know how lucky they have it, I suppose, but it's great. And, you know, as you mentioned, the kind of the foundations of the sport being, you know, better than they've ever been is absolutely fantastic. And let's segue that to Rome, because, you know, I said we had it for the Irish fighters. We had it somewhat a lot for there was always a great scene in the UK, and, you know, we spoke about the Scottish scene before. That's improving all the time as well. And we just spoke about Oban with the Welsh scene. and we've seen it with Eastern European, with other promotions as well over the last while. But I feel like Italy is one of those ones, and Cage Warriors have been leading the way obviously over there as well, but with Venator coming before it as well, where you see a lot of the guys now coming up, not just to be on the card, but headlining the card and doing good things and getting towards title shots and stuff like that. For obviously you've been on the Italian scene with Cage Warriors over the last few years. Have you seen that improvement firsthand? And like, what do you think of the improvement maybe in the level of fighters of the Italians over the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact is, before Cage Warriors like made this commitment to Italy, there wasn't a big show there. Like Venator was cool, right? As a fan, I really enjoyed watching those shows, but it was very much Uncle Frank, the Mad Millionaire, putting on his he wanted to do a UFC show, right? Which is exactly what he did. I had a great story from one of my friends who worked one of those Venator shows. They all went back to the Fighters Hotel afterwards to watch UFC, and the hotel bar couldn't get the UFC on. So he went and paid the hotel next door to let them all into the bar, and just took everyone from one hotel to the other across the street.
I love it.
Just to watch the UFC. But like that's great, right? It's great to do, but it costs a lot of money, and no one with a lot of money is going to throw that kind of money away forever. You have to put things in place with the structure. And at the end of the day, if you've got a card full of UFC veterans, that's great for maybe one or two Italian guys, but where do the young guys get the fights? Where do they get the experience? Where do they get that building process? And obviously that's what Cage Warriors have done. They've given the guys on the regional circuit, the guys in the gyms, the platform and the structure. Those Italian guys know they're gonna, if they sign with Cage Warriors, they're gonna get offered 3 fights a year. They're gonna have the opportunity to fight 3 times a year, maybe get one in overseas. They're going to be matched well, and they're put on UFC Fight Pass straight away. So all of a sudden, people know who they are. So whether it's getting to the UFC or they win a few, they lose a few, and they go somewhere else, they've got that recognition behind them. They can maybe go elsewhere in Europe and sort of parlay that to other things. So yeah, so like I say, it's all about having that platform and that structure, and it obviously trickles down into the scene. Like when the scene gets built up, you've got more kids wanting to go into the gym. And spend the money on training, and that helps gyms grow and thrive, and better training partners, and it all works together in one big kind of symbiotic relationship. But it needed that organization to go in there and give it that kickstart, and that's what Cage Warriors has been doing over the past few years.
And it also needs the opportunity, I suppose, at the very top of cards, and that's what Giacomo Michelis has this week, I suppose. You mentioned the Irish card a few minutes ago. Like, we had the welterweight title fight on the Irish card. Obviously, James Sheehan was defeated by Justin Burlinson in that, and you look at this fight and you think, okay, 7-1, like fairly young in his career, but you look at the last 2 fights and it's Ali Sanatani and Mushaslani. And you're kind of thinking of that, like, if you beat those 2 lads, you are on the road, I think, for a title shot, for a title shot in your last 4 fights in a row. And the opponent that they're giving you is an Ian Dean special, 20-7 guy with a lot of experience, 36 years of age in the prime of his career, who's won 6 of his last 7 fights. And has, fought all over the place and fought some very, very good guys as well, like being in there with like Rabzabov and other people like that, and guys with a lot of fights down through the years, and it's a real test. And like, I don't know how it's been said or anything, but do you think this could be a number 1 contender fight? Like, obviously for Sado, if he's coming into this spot in Cage Warriors with that amount of experience, I'm sure it will be for him. But for Michelis as well, it's such a massive opportunity that could put him right there in contention.
Yeah, I think from Sado Ucar's point of view, if you look back to last year when he was signed to Cage Warriors, his first fight was supposed to be Justin Burlinson in what would have been a title eliminator, right? So now Burlinson's the champ. Sado unfortunately was, I believe he was injured at the end of last year, which is a guy who's on a bit of a streak in the main event. Ian's obviously not said anything, directly along those lines, but it just stinks of a title eliminator, right? You've got a guy in a big run. We've got another show in Italy planned this year and more next year. You obviously need headlining guys to be going back there, and you want a headline with a local guy. So for Giacomo, 4 in a row, if he gets it done impressively here, there's no reason to think that he wouldn't be at the top of the pecking order. And when you've got a guy like Sado, who's, as you say, 20 wins, 17 finishes, He's putting guys out. He's submitting guys in spectacular fashion. 36 years of age. It's a kind of now or never situation. If he can go in there and get some crazy knockout or some crazy submission, yeah, why not stick him straight in there for my money?
100%. And these two lads, watching tape of them is it makes for a very interesting fight, I think, because first of all, both of these lads are the type of fighters that their opponents always try to take them down. They always try to take them down, but in very different ways. Like watching Michelis, I've never seen someone like panic their opponents with calmness as much as he does. He's really good at just staying calm in the pocket, fighting out of the southpaw stance as well, and very much kind of fights in straight lines, which is somewhat unusual in MMA these days. And I remember we talked about it before, but like there's a lot of different ways of fighting, a lot of different ways of defending in MMA, but maybe the most risky of them is in straight lines. But if you're fast enough to do it and you're good enough to do it to get to time it, I suppose it's maybe the most dangerous way of fighting, and he's very, very good at it. And as I said, like when he backs up, people try to grapple him all the time, and he ends up like getting people to the cage and maybe holding them there and then causing them real trouble when they break up again, because it just tires opponents out, and he's fine at doing it. Like really good leg kicks as well, and those straight punches and teeth. And then the other side of it, like Ucar, like I would call him a technical brawler maybe, but like that's a bit unfair to him. Like he's lovely spinning kicks, like all out attack. Again, a guy who gets taken down an awful lot, but like really good at sweeping and getting the back. And you're mentioning the amount of finishes he has there. Like he has 9 knockouts and 8 submissions for a guy who doesn't really try to take lads down or isn't a wrestler per se. He's submitted an awful lot of lads, and that'll tell you a story, I suppose. Loves that kind of counter to jab and head kicks as well. How do you see like this one playing out? Because when you have like the calmness of one guy and the madness of another guy, like is there going to be a middle ground here? What way do you think it'll go?
For me, it's one of those coin toss fights, which is why I'm kind of looking forward to it so much. It's going to be, to use the old sort of Randy Couture cliche, it's whoever imposes their will on the night. It's one of those situations. Giacomo, he's a wrestler first and foremost. That's what his background is. If he can get Sado to the mat and stay on top, we know he's got like a really exhausting ground and pound game. But that Sado's going to be going absolutely mad, like you say, with the sweeps and the reversals. He's going to really be making him work. So it's going to go one of two ways. One of them's going to hit something crazy earlier on, or it's going to become a real battle of attrition. And I think in that situation, you're going to be seeing Michelis shooting for takedowns. You're going to be seeing him wanting to control Sado on the ground, because come the end of the second round, the third round, the Turkish fighter is going to be loading up on those big shots, and if they're tired, they'll be doing a lot of wrestling, a lot of grappling, a lot of scrambles. One big shot is enough to put someone down. So yeah, I've not seen any of the odds yet, but I'm pretty confident that this one is going to be close to a pick'em, which is always good. If you're a neutral fan looking at this, don't have a horse in the race, it's going to be a great fight to watch, I think.
Yeah, I mean to say that as well about Giacomo's offensive wrestling, but I think he uses it so well, defensively, that like he almost is like, well, yeah, try to take me down, grand. do that. All you're doing is wasting your energy here. I'm like, that's such a hard type of guy to fight against. But as you say, like Sado is the type of guy, he's so much experience. He's probably met a few guys like that along the way before and probably knows how to fight them pretty well. But Michelis does seem to be, the coming guy. But we'll see. And I'm going to go with the young guy. I'll go with Michelis for my pick there. So we'll see how that goes. There's a lot of Irish interest on this as well, funnily enough, and I suppose the lead guy is Ryan Shelley taking on Simone Dana in what again is, I feel like the Shelley brothers, every time they're in a fight, it's almost a massive fight for them, because it's been a tough few years for both Ryan and Adam. Like, when you get in there with Nick Bagley, Jordi Bacchus, and Tobias Harila, I suppose it's always going to be a tough couple of years. But he's a chance now against, obviously, Simone Dana. Irish fans will know him well. I suppose, he's been in there with with Brian Moore, and he's fought, been on the scene for a long, long time, but obviously fighting over in his home country now. Another tough matchup for Ryan Shelley against the guy, who's been at the very, very top of the sport, fighting the very, very top of cage warriors, even fighting Jordan Vucinic and Albert Diaz and stuff. It's a very, very interesting matchup. But do you know what? It's one of those fights, Brad, that like it's hard to say it's a must win for both guys, but like if they're to get back on track and go to where they want to be, I suppose it is a bit of a must win.
Yeah, I don't think it's unfair at all to sort of put those kind of stakes on it. It's a bit of a cliche, but as you said, Ryan's been in some really, really tough fights recently. I think he's lost 3 of his last 4. Simone, record's a bit better than that, but he's been fighting very sporadically. We saw him debut against Albert Diaz back in 2023. Then he had the loss to Jordan Vucinic, and he's only fought once since then, which was earlier this year. Got a good win over Scottoli in March of this year. So he's been super keen to get back in there at the first possible opportunity and start building some momentum. But it's another step back up for him now. Ryan's a very, very dangerous fighter. You got to deal with those, effectively decades of taekwondo and kickboxing experience, and obviously the MMA game that he's rounded out under the guys at Team KF. It can be very, very interesting to see how Diana approaches this one. If you remember when Jordan started off fighting Diana, had a few exchanges on the feet, got into it a little bit, felt the power, and said, you know what, this is going on the floor. And while we've seen Diana get a lot of submissions too, is he going to want to stand and bang with Ryan? Because those shots, those spinning kicks coming in from weird angles, you can get caught. There's going to be a bit of national pride on the line here for Diana as well. Co-main event, big spot for him. He's going to want to get this win and advance his career. And Shelley's got to know now that if he doesn't get the win here, it's a long road back. If he's got Cage Warriors title aspirations, in the next couple of years, if that's what he's aiming for, fights like this are the ones you've got to win, because a win over a guy like Diana is going to put you right back up there in the mix.
Yeah, and Shelley obviously started off his career 6-0, the last 2 of which were Matthew Elliott and Josh Reed, like 2 top wins in Cage Warriors, and obviously it's taken a turn since then. But I think these fights suits both lads in a way. Like Diana, I always compare him to Matt Brown, all elbows and just very old school type of fighter. And I feel for Ryan Shelley a little bit. You mentioned there like he the taekwondo background and years of it. If you watched his Cage Warriors fights, like I guarantee you maybe people wouldn't realize that if you didn't know anything about him. So maybe he needs to get back to that a little bit. And I think this is a sort of, you said Diana fighting the feet. I think you will. I think both of these lads will be able to go to, or are be willing to go toe to toe with each other. It's funny enough though. Shelley's has been grappling probably more than he should over the last few fights. And like you were kind of mentioning there, could there be a bit of grappling? I actually think he could be the one who grapples in this fight a little bit. And he's actually gotten really good at it, and he's a well-rounded fighter, but I think you need to go back to basics a little bit here and try to fight this fighting field. It's one I don't know, it's a really tough fight to call, because whoever shows up on the day is he's going to be favoured. And I think you talked about the betting odds for the main event. I think this one could be very, very close as well. But Ryan Shelley is one of those guys you could never write him off from going on a serious run and getting to a Cage Warriors title or going even further than that. But it's a very, very interesting co-main event, and it's interesting as well that we've seen it a bit here in Ireland before, but like the 2 Italian guys have 2 pretty tough fights, so it could be either a very good night or a very bad night. So we'll see how that works out, I suppose. The Nicolas Soli fight as well against Sula Hijab. This is one of those fighters and one of those fights that we talked about in our most recent preview for a guy. Like I saw Nicolas Soli when I was doing this. I was like, oh yeah, he said, he's had a lot of fights, and I've watched him a lot of times in Cage Warriors. And then I looked, I was like, wait, no, actually, all he's there in Bellator, all of those fights. I know he's coming over here and he's fighting in Cage Warriors. And I think that is so healthy that, like, it was, basically the Bellator European series. But, like, we've obviously seen a lot of lads from Cage Warriors go different places. Now we see lads from Bellator, Octagon, KSW, things like that coming to Cage Warriors as well. I think that's so good. And to have a guy like Soli on this card as well. I watched a bit of his opponent. he hits very, very hard. Won his last two fights in a row. This is his first fight in Cage Warriors as well. I think it's an interesting fight and a good start to his career. But it's good to have fighters like that coming on board as well, Brad, and fighting in Cage Warriors.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this isn't a knock on any other promotions at all, but it's that consistency, right? For someone like Soli, he wants to get the fights in, he wants to fight on Italian soil, but you can do that 2-3 times a year with Cage Warriors. Can you do it elsewhere? Maybe one, maybe not. So if you want to have that consistency and you want to have that platform, look, we all know there's loads of options out there. Let's not pretend there isn't. There's your Octagons, there's your PFL Europes, et cetera, et cetera. When people are making the decision to sign with Cage Warriors, that's one thing they're looking at, right? They know there's going to be 18 shows a year, every year. They know they're all on Fight Pass, so that they know the opportunities are going to be there. So yeah, it's great to have guys, who've perhaps had big show experience elsewhere coming in. It keeps things fresh, it mixes things up. Look, this is the kind of stuff that, if you got into the sport, when I got into the sport and you basically had UFC and Pride, it's the kind of stuff you sort of dreamed about, right? The dream matches of a guy who's maybe had a few fights in Bellator coming over and testing it against a guy who's had a few fights in Cage Warriors. Like it's great, I think, for fans to see, and obviously it's great for the fighters to have options. And I think this in particular, really fun fight. Two guys with great styles. Sulo hits like a truck, coming off a couple of big finishes, and Nicolo's an absolute scrapper. So yeah, great to see him on Cage Warriors, and looking forward to this one. I think it should be a nice middle of the main card tear up.
Mm-hmm. My favorite fight in this card, I think, is Paddy McCarry against Suki Faraj.
No relation to Nigel, by the way.
I was going to ask that. Watching back Paddy McCarry, I talked about Nick Bagley the last time, and said he was I thought he was the best fighter in Cage Warriors. Paddy McCarry's only 6 fights in, but you look at the way he fights, and obviously it's higher up weight class and things like that. But God, by God, this guy is a fucking athlete and a beast. You look at his record 5-1. He's only lost to James Webb, who's the 2-time champion, in 2-weight champion even in Cage Warriors. Looks so good.
And you think to that James Webb fight as well. Remember, he stepped in at really short notice. Yes. I think it was only his 3rd pro fight or something.
Yeah,
and he kind of stepped in and he hurt James in that 3rd round. Obviously lost the fight, but when you talk about a loss doing just as much as a victory, that's exactly what we're talking about. So you certainly no one could ever knock Paddy for stepping up, but the fact that he went and performed in that speaks volumes.
Coming out of you could argue the Inform gym in Europe in FAI at the moment, obviously with Paul Hughes and many others as well. He's looking so good, and it's weird that flying knee knockout over Hewitt. It was 3 fights ago, but it felt like it only happened, a couple of months ago. But he such a good fighter. But this Faraj guy is very, very good as well. Now the opponents that I watched one guy and he looked closer to my physique than other people. But we'll get over that. But very good range fighter, good jabs and good kicks from the outside. And Paddy kind of is a range fighter as well in a way, where he kind of draws lads in and counters them. And I think it was that Hewitt fight, or maybe another fight, where he dropped someone and you didn't even see it happening. He's for a bigger guy, so good and bangs so hard. This is a very interesting fight. I don't know how much you've seen of Faraj, Brad, but he at 2-0 is you might think this is a bit of a sheep to the wolves, or whatever that saying is, coming in here. But this guy I think he's going to put it up to Paddy. I think Paddy will win the fight. That would be my pick. But Faraj is no joke.
It's lambs to the slaughter is the
there we go. That's
word
it.
You're looking for.
I was close enough.
I'm so sorry. No, look, I'm looking forward to this. I've looked gutted for Paddy. Obviously, he's supposed to compete in Dublin a few weeks back. And his opponent Hassan Abdanabi, I was really looking forward to that fight. That was one of my ones I was really keen on that card. So unfortunately, Hassan had a medical issue. Nothing mega serious. The kind of thing that you can get cleared very quickly. It's just an anomaly that got picked up. Obviously, I can't talk about exactly what it was, but for an example, every time I have an ECG, it's slightly off and the doctor panics for a second and they get a senior guy to come in and look at it and he says, no, it's fine. It's one of those kind of things, it's something that's, very easy to get cleared from. And I do believe he's going to be back with us on Cage Warriors quite soon. So hopefully all that will get resolved. But, for Paddy being told middle of the fight card, I mean, I don't think it was even an hour before he was supposed to fight that the fight's off. I'm absolutely gutted. And obviously it was his first fight back since The Ultimate Fighter. Thought he gave a really good account of himself on the show. He's certainly earned his spot. And look, big win here for Paddy. There's no reason that he can't go Contender Series for my money. There's no reason he can't get, a shot in the UFC. He's a middleweight. They're not necessarily looking for guys to have 10, 15 fights in middleweight. You can get in there pretty quick. And we know Paddy is the kind of guy they want, right? He's got the personality. He's really dynamic. He's a finisher. He's got a load of highlight reel knockouts, highlight reel finishes. And if he gets another one here, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see his name on one of the later episodes of the Contender Series this year.
Just such a great prospect, unbelievable. You could say the same about Kadim D. And what about George McManus? This guy he doesn't care, does he? He just fight absolutely anyone and go in there and put on a good account of himself. But Dia, fast hands, very awkward type of guy to fight with his, big switch knees and short shots, and goes for leg locks on the ground, and I imagine a really annoying guy to fight. But Dia is one of those guys, I suppose, that came out of nowhere is a bit unfair maybe, but at 6-0 right now. Again, at welterweight, that division is wide open at the moment, but and he's getting the tests, the test against George McManus. It's an interesting fight for Dia, but George McManus, you couldn't rule him out, could you? He's, George is experienced now, and he's always game.
Yeah, I think, in terms of like pure grappling, he's probably one of the more dangerous guys in that division. He's been grappling since, I want to say something crazy, like he was like 12 years old or something, being a competitive grappler. And obviously, been training MMA for a very young age. His head coach is his dad, Jamie. So it's a family thing. His dad, obviously, running First Legion Gym, and he's grown up in that. The dude's a stud. He's a competitor. He'll fight anyone. This may come as a shock to some MMA fans out there, but when your favorite fighters on social media saying they'll fight anyone, it's not always true. Fights get turned down all the time. But George is one of those guys who's, you give him a name, yeah, why not? No problem. And you only need to look at his resume to see that. You'll see names like Owen Elliott, you'll see names like Ian Gary, and he always gets stuck in. You can't fault him. Kadeem loves to get stuck in as well. For my money, one of the best decisions he made was dropping to welterweight. I think he would have been quite happy staying at middle. But he's obviously, had to make some changes, work on the fitness, work on the conditioning a little bit more. And I think he's the better fighter for it. I think he slots into that welterweight division quite nicely. And, again, you're looking at a real prospect here, a young lad. He's got a lot of support. He's from Milan, has a big fan base there. And unfortunately, I think they're all going to be watching the Champions League final on Saturday night. But I'm sure they'll have Fight Pass open on their phones. But yeah, very excited to see this one. McManus is 100% like the test guy in this division. I think, if you can get past him, you're on to big things. But if you give him an inch, he's going to take a mile. We saw that with Dara Ward, his last fight, a crazy one. And there was that submission that it took us about 15 minutes and 10 camera angles to actually find, what a fight that was. I'd love to see that one run back in the future, regardless of what happens here. But yeah, big opportunity for Kadeem here against a really tough guy. And, a huge opportunity for George as well to, be like, look, you keep slinging me these prospects and I'll keep ruining the days. So, yeah, very much looking forward to this one.
We're kind of caught for time here, but one guy I definitely wanted to mention is Gary Rooney as well on the undercard. And this is a really good fight against Enrico Degani. You watched a bit of him, like, very small guy, obviously, for the weight class, but southpaw, and he can crack hard, and good wrestler, good BJJ. Really, I looked at him as like fast hands, slow feet type of guy, and which is weird, but like he catches guys so well. And I think looking at Gary, I was talking to my colleague Ian O'Neill about him. He was saying, like, if Gary can get most fights to the ground, he's beaten a lot of guys, but I think he's improved on the feet as well, and maybe to come on a little bit defensively on the feet, but I think his offensive striking, he's looking tight, and his hooks are good, just maybe a tad green, you tad unnatural so far, but when Gary Rooney hits in 4 or 5 fights time, I think it could be really, really interesting. That's an interesting fight as well. It's it's a fight both guys could win. It's a fight both guys could lose, but very, very interesting. Before we go, Brad, anyone else on the card that stands out to you that we should be looking at? I know there's a good few Italian prospects on this. Up towards the top of the card, Giuseppe Ruggiero at 9-1. It's a big fight for him. Nicholas LeBlanc is on the card as well, who we've seen a good few times. Luca Barando as well. But anyone else we should be looking out for on the card, Brad?
I mean, the two I was gonna say, you've already mentioned Ruggiero coming off career best knockout over Orlando Wilson Prince, the former title challenger. Yeah, he's again a guy who struggled with consistency, but he's getting these fights in now. I think he's only 22 years old as well, so at 9-1, a big finisher. Definitely want to tune in for. Nicolas LeBlanc, if circumstances were different, he'd be fighting for the title against Shadchak. I know he wanted to get out a little bit earlier. Shadchak's obviously fighting in London. But LeBlanc's thinking that there's obviously rumors about UFC going to Paris in September, and he's wanting to get a fight and hopefully get signed for that. I would imagine if that doesn't happen, he'll fight for the title should he get a win here. So a big fight for LeBlanc. And look, one of my favorite guys to watch on the roster, Giuseppe Mastro Giacomo. Again, 21, 22 years of age. Lost to Aiden Lee last time out. No shame in that. Aiden Lee, super experienced, super talented. It was a little bit too much too soon. But this is a great comeback fight for him. One of the most fluid guys to watch. He can just go and go and go, string crazy stuff together. And again, like I say, 21, 22 years of age. He's got the whole future of this ahead of him. And yeah, very much looking forward to seeing him on the comeback trail next Saturday.
May 31st, Rome, Italy. If you're over there, buy a ticket, go and see it. If not, UFC Fight Pass all around the world. Tune in Saturday night, May 31st. Brad will be on commentary. I'll be tweeting about it. We'll all be watching. Brad, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. My name is Sheehan for Sherdog.com. I'll see you all next time.